It was one of those nights where the city seemed to breathe differently. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and the usual hustle had faded into a gentle hum of distant traffic and occasional footsteps. I was standing at my regular bus stop, checking my watch for what felt like the 100th time. The digital display at the stop confirmed what I already knew. The last bus of the night was due in just 5 minutes. This was my routine, catching the 11:45 p.m. bus after my late shift at the downtown cafe. The night air had a slight chill to it, just enough to make me pull my jacket a little tighter around my shoulders. There's something uniquely vulnerable about waiting for the last bus of the night. It's not just transportation, it's your final lifeline home. Miss it, and you're faced with either an expensive rideshare or a very long walk. I'd been commuting this way for almost 2 years, and I developed a sort of sixth sense about the rhythm of the city at this hour. The same faces often appeared on this last run. The bartender from the pub 3 blocks down, the night nurse heading to her shift at Memorial Hospital, and occasionally, a few stragglers from the late-night movie theater. Let me explain why these commute moments matter more than we realize. In a city of millions, these brief intersections of lives are sometimes the only human connection we get in a day. We rarely speak to each other, just nod in silent recognition of our shared dependence on public transportation. But there's comfort in that familiar anonymity, in knowing that others are navigating the same urban landscape at the same ungodly hours. I was scrolling mindlessly through my phone when I heard rapid footsteps approaching. Looking up, I saw him running toward the stop, clearly desperate not to miss the bus. He was tall, with dark tousled hair that fell across his forehead, wearing jeans and a navy blue sweater that looked soft and well-worn. There was something immediately approachable about him. Maybe it was the slight flush in his cheeks from running, or the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he caught my gaze and smiled apologetically. "Did I miss it?" he asked, slightly out of breath, glancing at the empty street and then back at me. I checked my watch again. Not yet. Should be here in about 3 minutes. He exhaled with relief, running a hand through his hair. Thank goodness. I thought for sure I'd blown it. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, both watching the empty street. 1 minute passed. Then 2. Then 5. The realization dawned on us simultaneously. The last bus wasn't coming. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, pulling out my phone to check the transit app. Sure enough, there was a service alert. The final bus had been canceled due to a mechanical issue. No replacement service available. The stranger peered over my shoulder at my phone screen and groaned. Perfect. Just perfect. He stepped back, hands on his hips, looking up at the night sky as if seeking divine intervention. "I live all the way in Westbrook. That's like a 2-hour walk from here." I nodded sympathetically. My apartment was much closer, about a 20-minute walk, but I understood his frustration. The rideshare prices at this hour would be astronomical. "What about you?" he asked, turning to me with genuine curiosity. "Are you far from home?" "Not too bad," I admitted. "I'm over on Maple Street. About 20 minutes on foot." He nodded, calculating something in his mind. Then, with a casual tone that couldn't quite mask his vulnerability, he asked, "Is your couch taken tonight?" The question hung in the air between us. In that moment, I was acutely aware of all the reasons I should say no. He was a stranger. We were in a city where people typically minded their own business. I had work in the morning. My apartment was small. My mother's voice echoed in my head, warning me about the dangers of trusting too easily. But there was something disarmingly genuine about him. His question wasn't presumptuous or entitled. It was honest, a little desperate, and tinged with the kind of humor that acknowledges the absurdity of the situation. "I don't even know your name," I said, not quite a rejection but certainly not an acceptance. He extended his hand. "I'm Daniel. I work at the bookstore on 7th Street. I'm deathly allergic to peanuts, and I promise I'm not an axe murderer. Just a guy who really doesn't want to spend his entire paycheck on an Uber tonight." I couldn't help but laugh as I shook his hand. "I'm Alex. I make a mean cappuccino at Riverside Cafe. I have an unreasonable collection of vintage band t-shirts, and my couch has seen better days, but it's surprisingly comfortable. Let me pause here to acknowledge something important. This moment of decision wasn't just about offering a place to crash. It was about that rare opportunity to break out of the isolation that city living often imposes on us. How many times had I made eye contact with someone on the bus, felt a flicker of connection, only to look away and never speak? How many potential friendships or relationships had I missed because it felt safer to stay within the boundaries of polite indifference? Daniel smiled, and there was genuine relief in his eyes. "I would be eternally grateful for your surprisingly comfortable couch, Alex. I can be gone before you leave for work, and I'll even throw in breakfast if you have the ingredients. As we began walking toward my apartment, the initial awkwardness gradually melted away. The conversation flowed naturally, jumping from topic to topic. Our jobs, how long we lived in the city, our favorite late-night diners, the worst public transportation experiences we'd had. So what did you out so late tonight? I asked as we turned onto a quieter residential street. Poetry reading, he admitted with a slightly embarrassed laugh. I know, it sounds pretentious, but this group meets once a month at this tiny bookshop, and they're actually really good. No flowery sonnets about unrequited love, more like raw, honest stuff about city life and identity and all that. That doesn't sound pretentious at all, I said, genuinely intrigued. It sounds interesting. I've never been to a poetry reading. You should come sometime, he said, then quickly added, I mean, if you want to. No pressure. There was something endearing about his enthusiasm, the way he lit up talking about something he clearly cared about. By the time we reached my apartment building, I realized I was actually looking forward to having company, even if it was unexpected. My apartment was on the third floor of an old converted warehouse, nothing fancy, but it had character with its exposed brick walls and large windows. As I unlocked the door, I felt a momentary pang of self-consciousness. I hadn't been expecting company. There were dishes in the sink and books scattered across the coffee table. Sorry about the mess, I said automatically as we stepped inside. Wasn't exactly planning on having guests tonight. Daniel shook his head. Are you kidding? This place is great. And trust me, my apartment looks like a library exploded in it most days. I gave him a quick tour, which took all of about 2 minutes given the size of the place. Bathrooms through there, kitchen's obviously here, and this, I gestured to the living room with its worn but comfortable couch, is your 5-star accommodation for the evening. It's perfect, he said sincerely. Seriously, thank you for this. I know it's not normal to invite strangers into your home. Well, we're not exactly strangers anymore, I pointed out. I know about your peanut allergy and your poetry habit. That's practically friendship territory. We both laughed, and some of the remaining tension dissipated. I found myself in the kitchen, pulling out mugs. Tea? Coffee? Fair warning, I might judge you based on your choice. Tea, please, he answered, settling onto the couch. And I'm prepared to be judged. Tea is acceptable, I said with mock seriousness, putting the kettle on. Coffee would have been equally acceptable. The wrong answer would have been, I don't drink either. As I prepared the tea, I could hear him looking through my record collection that was stacked next to the small turntable in the living room. You actually listen to these, he called out. Or are they just for decoration like most people our age? I brought the mugs over, setting them on the coffee table. I actually listen to them. My dad got me into vinyl when I was a teenager. Said digital music lacks soul. Daniel nodded appreciatively, carefully handling a Fleetwood Mac album. Your dad sounds cool. Mine was more of a talk radio kind of guy. This launched us into a conversation about music, our parents, growing up in different parts of the country, but somehow ending up in the same city. Hours slipped by without either of us noticing. The tea grew cold as we talked about our dreams, our disappointments, the paths we thought our lives would take versus the reality. I never thought I'd still be working at a bookstore at 30, Daniel admitted, leaning back against the couch cushions. I was supposed to have written the great American novel by now, or at least have a job that impresses people at parties. Do you like working at the bookstore? I asked. He considered this for a moment. Yeah, I really do. It's not glamorous, but I'm surrounded by books all day, and sometimes I get to recommend exactly the right book to someone who needs it. That feels like magic. Then it sounds like exactly where you should be, I said. Besides, what job actually impresses people at parties? Everyone's either pretending their job is more interesting than it is, or they're honest about hating it. Daniel laughed. That's disturbingly accurate. What about you? Was being a cafe barista the dream? I shook my head. No, but it's a good gig while I finish my graphic design degree. 1 more year to go. Then I'll be the one pretending my job is more glamorous than it is at parties. Graphic design, huh? That's actually really cool. His interest seemed genuine. Do you have any of your work I could see? Normally, I would have deflected. My portfolio was something I kept close, showing only to professors and potential employers. But there was something about the late hour, the unexpected intimacy of having this stranger-turned acquaintance in my living room, that made me reach for my laptop. We spent the next hour with our heads bent over the screen as I showed him projects I was working on, logo designs, website mock-ups, and illustration series I was particularly proud of. He asked thoughtful questions, pointed out details I hadn't realized were effective, and by the time we finally looked up, it was nearly 3 a.m. "We should probably get some sleep," I said, suddenly aware of how tired I was. "I have to be at work by 10. "Of course," Daniel agreed immediately. "I've kept you up way too late." I gathered some blankets and a spare pillow from the closet, helping him set up the couch. There was a brief, awkward moment as we stood facing each other, both aware that we'd shared more with each other in a few hours than many people do after weeks of knowing someone. "Thanks again," he said softly. "Not just for the couch, but for this. The conversation. It's been a while since I've talked to someone like this." "Me too," I admitted. "It's nice, actually. Even if it took a missed bus to make it happen." He smiled, and there was something in his expression, a warmth, a possibility that made my heart beat a little faster. Maybe the universe knew what it was doing with that mechanical failure. "Maybe," I agreed, feeling suddenly shy. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Alex." I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door behind me. As I lay in bed, I could hear the soft sounds of him settling on the couch, and I was struck by how quickly the presence of another person can transform a space. My apartment, which had always been just mine, now felt different, fuller somehow, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Morning came too quickly, sunlight streaming through the blinds I'd forgotten to close. For a moment, I was disoriented, then the memories of the previous night came flooding back. I wondered briefly if it had been a dream, but then I heard movement in the kitchen. When I emerged from my bedroom, I found Daniel making breakfast. He'd found eggs and cheese in my refrigerator and was in the process of making omelets. "Hope this is okay," he said when he saw me. "I wanted to make good on my breakfast promise before I head out." "It's more than okay," I assured him, moving to the coffee maker. I can't remember the last time someone made me breakfast. We ate together at my small kitchen table, the morning light casting everything in a different perspective than the intimate darkness of the night before. In daylight, I could see the flecks of green in his hazel eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "So," he said, setting down his fork, "I should probably get going soon. Let you get ready for work." I nodded, feeling a strange reluctance to see him leave. "Right, of course." There was a pause, both of us seemingly searching for the right words. "Listen," he began. "Just as I said, I was thinking." We both stopped, laughed awkwardly. "You first," I offered. Daniel took a deep breath. "I was wondering if maybe I could get your number? Not just to thank you properly for saving me from a night of homelessness, but because I'd really like to see you again. Maybe intentionally this time, not just because of public transportation failures." The warmth that spread through me was immediate and undeniable. "I'd like that," I said, trying not to sound too eager. "A lot, actually." We exchanged numbers, and as he prepared to leave, there was a new energy between us, the potential of something beginning rather than ending. At the door, he turned back to me. "You know, I've lived in this city for 5 years, and it's funny how you can be surrounded by millions of people and still feel completely alone sometimes." "I know exactly what you mean," I said quietly. "But last night," he continued, his eyes meeting mine, "last night was the first time in a long time that I didn't feel that way." And then, in a gesture that felt both spontaneous and inevitable, he leaned in and kissed me. It was brief, gentle, a question as much as a statement. When he pulled back, the look in his eyes was a mixture of hope and vulnerability that perfectly mirrored what I was feeling. "I'll call you," he promised, and somehow, I knew he would. After he left, I stood in my apartment, which now seemed strangely empty without him. I was going to be late for work, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Something had shifted, not just in my routine but in my perspective. The city that had always felt like a place of anonymous faces and missed connections now held a new possibility. That's the thing about commutes, about the daily rhythms that we fall into without thinking. We see the same strangers day after day, standing at the same bus stops, sitting in the same train cars, all of us in our own bubbles, focused on getting from one place to another. We rarely consider that any of these passing faces could become significant, could step out of the background and into the foreground of our lives. But sometimes, all it takes is a missed bus, a simple question, a moment of kindness or courage to transform a stranger into something more. Sometimes, the detours from our carefully planned routes lead us exactly where we need to go. Daniel did call, later that same day. And the next. We met for coffee, then dinner, then spent a weekend exploring parts of the city neither of us had ever visited despite living here for years. 2 months later, he helped me move into a new apartment, one with a better couch, we both agreed. 6 months after that, I stopped referring to it as my apartment and started calling it ours. Now, whenever I'm waiting at that same bus stop, I can't help but smile at the memory of that night. I watch the faces of the people around me, all of us connected by the shared space and time, all of us with our own stories, our own missed buses and unexpected encounters. And I wonder how many potential connections are passing by unnoticed, how many lives could intersect in meaningful ways if only we were brave enough to look up from our phones, to ask a question, to offer a couch to a stranger. Because here's what I've learned. In a world that often feels disconnected despite all our digital tethers, the most profound connections can begin in the most ordinary places. A bus stop, a late-night conversation, a simple act of trust. So the next time you're on your commute, look around at the faces that have become familiar strangers. Consider that any one of them could be significant in ways you can't yet imagine. And remember that sometimes, missing the last bus home might just be the beginning of finding where you truly belong. Total_char_count, 18,732.